You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Lowe's knows how to help you get the most out of your store run. That's why members save more with MyLowe's Rewards. Earn points towards MyLowe's money on eligible purchases. Get access to member-only deals and free member gifts. Plus, unlock free standard shipping when you reach Silver Key status. So what are you waiting for? Join for free today. Lowe's. We help. You save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you for joining us. With me is Dr. Eric Larson of the Paradocs podcast. Thank you for being here at my kitchen table. It's a surprise. You just showed up. I was making eggs, and he knocked on the back door and said, "Mind if I come on in?" And I was like, "Sure." No, it's not what happened at all. What are you in Indianapolis for?
I'm here for the Big Ten tournament. So I originally was going to come for the weather. I heard it was going to be nice and warm, and I think it's 1 degrees out after with the wind chill, or actually even now without the wind chill, it's freezing. So cold.
I walked downstairs this morning, and it was 60 degrees in my living room, and I was like, "Oh, it's 19 degrees outside, but sunny and beautiful." And yeah, we're ready for spring. It was like 60, 70 degrees the other day. We were at a park.
Well, when I looked at the weather a week ago when we were planning this trip for the Big Ten tournament, it was supposed to be, I think, in the 50s. So it was going to be nice. I was thinking, I'll wear some T-shirts. And,
right.
I mean, 50s in the spring for the Midwest, that's short weather, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the fall, of course, you're like freezing at 50 degrees. But in the spring, it's like, wow, And so I came down the front desk, and I actually walked up to him. I said, it's snowing outside. I was told it's going to be a lot warmer. I'd like a refund. And the guy's like, really? No, I really just need some more shampoo, but I'm good. So it's but we for the weather, we got the coats, we got the sweatshirts and stuff. So it's spring in the Midwest.
So who's your team? Who are you here rooting for?
Well, it's tricky with our family. So I did medical school at Michigan. At Iowa. I'm from Michigan. I grew up a Michigan State fan.
Is the degree all that worthy if you can't remember where you went?
Well, so it's funny. I've got degrees from both. I've got degrees from Michigan from undergraduate, and then I went to Iowa for medical school. So I've got Iowa there. And so the last time we went to Big Ten tournament in 2019 in Chicago, my daughter's with me, and she'd just been accepted to Michigan. So she was going to be the Michigan fan. My wife, who's from Iowa, is the Iowa fan, and then I'm the Michigan State fan because that's where I grew up. Even though I went to Michigan, very complicated. It's just the way it is.
Were you like self-loathing in your undergraduate as a Michigan State fan going to Michigan?
I got to the point, for you, it'd be like Indiana, Purdue, right?
Oh,
I got to the point where I could tolerate Michigan. And so I was, and when I had season tickets for the hockey team. And so I was a big Michigan hockey fan. I had a bunch of hockey players on my floor too. Boy, these guys could drink. Anyway, so I was able to like Michigan quite a bit. I learned to despise Ohio State and the entire state. Yeah. So I got some good stuff out, and Notre Dame at the time. So
Ohio is the scourge of the Midwest. They're really like...
I'm glad you don't like them either.
No,
I didn't
they're
really
the
understand.
Mississippi of the North.
Yeah, it reminds me of the joke we used to tell in Iowa is if you give the bottom two tiers of counties of Iowa and give it to Missouri, you raise the IQ of both states. I feel like the same could be said for Michigan, Ohio.
And if you're from Virginia or Pennsylvania, we're talking about our West Virginia. I don't know what the Western equivalent is. Maybe it's Nevada. I don't know. Did they make fun of Idaho?
No one lives in Nevada except Vegas, right?
Yeah, as a lifelong IU fan, having Mitch Daniels at Purdue is so conflicting because I love Mitch Daniels, and he's done such a great job with Purdue, and Purdue's like on this great run with basketball, and you're just like, and IU's not good at any sports. And, I'm a reformed Bobby Knight fan. I used to love Bobby Knight as a kid, and then I grew up and I was like, oh, cruelty was the point, not a fan anymore. But yeah, it's hard living in a state where Purdue has so many admirable things about it, and you can't admit it. So I get it.
Terrible school colors. I mean,
yeah, right.
I mean, they're ugly.
Gold and black, and just like bad '80s design, and then that weird disembodied Boilermaker thing.
Yeah, their mascot is weird looking. He's better than the Nate Lion. We've actually, at the tournament, we've been able to analyze everyone's mascot. Now, some people don't have one. Like the Hoosiers don't have one.
Right.
The Wolverines, the Illini used to. Now Chief Illini Weck, he's gone.
Yeah.
So they don't have one.
Really, why?
Yeah, I can't imagine why. Right. But so, Iowa's got a good one. Herky, Bucky the Badger's not bad. The Goldie Gopher, he can spin his head around. He's pretty good. Although he looks like he needs to go to the dry cleaner, so he's a little bit grungy. The Nittany Lion looks terrible. He looks emaciated. I'm not quite sure. It almost looks like an art project from the 60s, or like the kid just picks up, the cheap Halloween costume. That's kind of what it looks like. The Scarlet Knights, they have a good one. And the Turtle, of course, Maryland's not bad. He's okay. So
Well, I actually did not graduate yet from IUPUI, but IUPUI original Jaguar, Google it. It is unbelievably bad.
So which one are the Mastodons? I thought that was is that the Fort Wayne?
That must be Fort Wayne.
I like to think I know lots of mascots here in the Midwest. So
yeah, the original Jaguar is, look at this thing. It
looks like it might be a Chewbacca. I can't tell, or like a Wookiee, or a little bit.
Yeah, it'll be the first link, Journey of the Jaguars. But you see it's really unbelievably bad. So you're on the network now with the Paradox podcast. It's hopefully going well for you. It's going well for us. We've gotten tons of great comments.
Oh, great.
But what are you going to do now that COVID's over? Let's talk about the end of COVID. And
COVID.
What are we going to do? Is COVID doesn't exist anymore, right?
I guess it depends where you live, right? I mean, I feel like it's been that way for about a year. I think the Big Ten tournament's a good example. I watched a lot of basketball, and so
we were going to meet March 2020.
March 2020, we're going to meet. I said,
Yeah.
hey, I'll come up. And then the world ended, and I said, well, we're just going to leave, because I think you could meet on Saturday, and we were supposed to be here through Sunday, like this week. Mm-hmm. And it just, like, my family, we came, Indianapolis had shut down. We tried to do stuff, but...
You got to 465.
Yeah, we got 465.
Yeah,
and then right then they canceled the game. So we went to the field house, which I think wasn't Gainsbridge. It was something else. It was a Banker's Life at that time.
Banker's Life, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
the mergers every 2 years they changed the name.
It was
of the
Conseco, and I forget what it was originally called. I mean, it was Market Square Arena, and then they built the field house, but. We call it the Field House. It's like Deer Creek is Deer Creek.
Yeah,
we don't call it the whatever mortgage company. It's Deer Creek. Like Hoosiers it's still the Hoosier Dome. That thing's been torn down for 15 years. It's the Hoosier Dome. We don't call it the RCA Dome. We're very stubborn people.
So anyway, yeah, we're there. We went to a couple games and then they announced at the game. But they said the next games we're not going to have fans because we're trying to 2 weeks just flatten the curve. And then we were in our hotel room watching the game, getting ready, preparing for the game, and then they called the whole thing off. And then the entire world had ended because the NBA canceled the day before or something. And yeah, so we're gonna meet then, and so I'm here now, and it's been great on the network. I've been very excited, very happy. It's not having COVID around as much. It seems nice. I watched the games. It depends what team you're watching as far as where the people wearing masks in the stands. It's very interesting. In Michigan, we've had fairly restrictive mandates, although strangely it's only been at universities. So if you're in a school or on campus, you have to wear masks. Otherwise, you don't have to wear masks anywhere else, which nothing makes any sense of the policies in the whole thing. It's been just bananas, right? And so the last game they said you can take your masks off, so we didn't for the last game. And then in the field house, 1%, maybe 0.5% have masks on.
Yeah.
Despite people coming from all the different states where they have very varying policies. Maryland, and in Wisconsin, Illinois, they have to wear masks a lot more. I don't know.
We last week we ranted about COVID with Brian Nichols a little bit, and why he moved from Philly, and him talking about Philly and how it's still very prevalent there. But here we haven't had it since July 2020. Really, any restrictions? Like I didn't put on a mask till April, and even then it was just if somebody asked you to put a mask on when you walked in, because I watched Fauci early on say it doesn't work. You touch your face. It's like only N95s work. So like the information was out there. But when you look at the last regulations around here, it's schools, daycares, and the airport on airplanes.
Right.
Like the last places that you don't really need it and it doesn't really function properly. Like the Y, for instance, the play and learn kids over 3 have to wear them. So there's 2 kids, including my 3-year-old, wearing a mask for the first time in her entire life. So we just stopped taking her to the Y. and then 20 sick 18-month-old kids, and then 99% of the buildings not wearing masks except for the employees. And I bitched about this on Twitter, and the YMCA sent me an email asking me to call them, so I need to talk to them and just because it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, and in hindsight, when you look back, like at all the things that didn't make sense, like masking on beaches, you can't go to, like Greenwood, which is a very Republican city, putting the construction barrier fencing around playgrounds.
Yes, right.
Or up in your state, people forget about all this stuff. Like, you can't go buy garden seeds at Walmart. You can only go to the grocery section, and you can't, like, all the picking and choosing that went into this stuff that never made any sense. I mean, I think I don't know about you, but I give people like a pass for the first 3 months. We didn't really know what was going on. We didn't know what it was. Yep. You started to see things like the Barrington Declaration come out. I know you've interviewed Bhattacharya, which was a great interview. And early on, it was kind of like where Joe Biden announced he was at the State of the Address. Just take care of the sick, use precautions, preventative measures, and that's all we can do. Let's, move along. So, like, looking back, things like the Indianapolis 500 that May makes sense to close down the world's largest sporting event. But we had it last year, had literally nobody got sick from it. 2 people died, but they showed up with COVID at the event. And so it's at full capacity again this year. Everything's back on like a normal year at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in May. Why didn't people look at events like that and the NFL games? We had a full season this year with fans. What city had a massive outbreak? Like, all right, I'm ranting now. Anyways, like when you look back, like closing down the NCAA tournament in May 2020, are you the type of person that goes, that was silly, that was reasonable? How are we to kind of judge what we got right and what we got wrong? How do you think about it?
Well, so I'm not an expert in the sense that I'm not someone who knows a lot about the virus or knew a lot about the virus back in last spring. So I think, or last spring, 2 springs ago, whatever now.
I spoke at the Libertarian Party of Indiana convention. I was like, last year when Don was running, and I completely forgot 2020.
Yeah, right. It's been hard keeping track of stuff. I think by summer of 2020, most of the things we know today, we knew then. If you're willing to accept the fact that if you're willing to look, I think a lot of things were obvious then. If I could figure those things out then, and you could listen back to my shows back when we were talking about then,
right?
There's a lot of obvious things. One is it's going to be an endemic disease. No matter whether there's a vaccine or not, that people will catch this and everyone will get it multiple times, which you're testament to that, right? Yeah. I mean, I've had it once as well. And so there's no point in preventing transmission because you're going to eventually get it.
Right.
Right. So you can't stop people from getting this. Now, you could make the argument that you can try and slow it in order to allow the hospital capacity to handle everyone that's going to be sick. And before vaccine, that was a position I think you could take, although the means for going about that didn't make much sense. I mean, there are a number of studies earlier that said that mask usage by the general public never slowed transmission of other respiratory diseases, namely the flu. Yeah. There's no reason to think this is much different than the flu. We get all kinds of respiratory diseases, other coronaviruses, rhinoviruses, metapneumoviruses, adenoviruses, and those just go through the community and sweep through, and there's nothing you can do about it. And no wearing of masks has ever been shown to be efficacious, effective. So there's no reason to think that was going to make a difference and help. So the only way you can really stop transmission is to limit activity and exposure for people. So you have to not see other people, which is impossible in society.
A communicable disease needs community. It makes sense. But I knew it wasn't going to work on Easter, right? Like the 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Like I drove by the Bob Evans and everybody's standing in a long line to get a pie. And that's when I went, okay, this is early April. Nobody believes this. Nobody's taking this that seriously. Like people have just made the decision making like for their own, their own disease vector. I don't know what you would call it. Their own risk factor.
Sure.
To kind of go, all right, I'm going to stay home if I have like elderly parents. And if you don't, like me, I'm going to Florida in July, YOLO, right? Like I stayed home in 2020, the month before I saw my parents at Christmas, right? Like there were things that I would do because it does make sense that you need community. But where did we go too far in hindsight in terms of lockdowns and shutting down businesses and trying to limit exposure in community?
Yeah.
Through like, let's say the first 4 months you get a pass a little bit. If you want to give a pass.
Sure.
Right? Okay. And then 2020, and then vaccine February of 2021, when the vaccine comes out, that's a whole different ballgame, right? Like in my mind, like you have a therapeutic to kind of...
Yeah. Oh, no question. No question.
Like, so when you're looking back at this stuff, how do you assess what worked and what didn't?
Yeah. I mean, I think the only thing that has worked is you have to get immunity to this disease one of two ways. One is through infection, through acquiring it through from other people, or through vaccination. I mean, those are the only ways. I mean, all vaccine does is it simulates you getting infected, right? So to create immune response and long-term immunity. So yeah, there's an initial period, like you said, the first few months where we can say we didn't really know. And we didn't know how dangerous it was to children. We didn't know how dangerous it was to adults. And now by honestly, April, May, June at the latest, we knew that kids were not going to be significantly at risk from this. Yes, there are kids who've passed away. Yes, there are kids who get sick. Yes, there are kids who get hospitalized. Long COVID, plus minus how much that is really a thing. I mean, people will quibble about that, but it wasn't going to be. This is not like polio. This is not like measles. I mean, it's not like all kinds of RSV, for instance, is far more dangerous than COVID for children, small children. So we should have known right then. What you want to do as a community is you want to raise the immunity levels as much as you can. And again, at that time, the only way was through getting infected.
Right.
If you had every kid infected, that you would remove one vector. So closing schools was a gigantic problem for two reasons. One is I think it prevents you from getting a nice community immunity sort of pool, but also there are all the secondary effects that schools keeping kids out of school has. Obesity, learning disabilities, speech delays, massive anxiety and depression, mental health problems that you see from kids that, yes, is probably partly just the overall gestalt of just the pandemic. And that's what got kids. But also the fact that you're limiting their social interaction, you're limiting their, their extracurriculars, all those things. Those are all real important. And then of course, there's all the things that you have schools closing. And now you have parents who can't work or parents who have childcare problems, causes disruptions throughout the rest of the economy. It causes all kinds of problems. And yes, kids, if they got sick, they probably are transmitting to parents occasionally, although it still seemed at that time that their transmission was not as efficient going to adults from kids. So it probably would have been really helpful to have a lot of those kids get hurt, or it's certainly not as harmful as we initially expected. And there's been massive disruption and problems because of that.
Yeah, well, I hosted a public affairs show here in Indianapolis, and what I tried to do with that show, which you can go back and listen to, like the super cuts of a lot of those interviews, was show that the human cost of the lockdowns from people who were actually like on the ground working with people, like the Family's First interview, 300% increase in their suicide hotline through that year. The Gleaners interview, 3 to 4 times the food needs. Like the school-oriented groups, like the like the cycling group, I think it's like 3-9 something. Literally every one of those charities had to pivot for poor relief. And what I didn't understand was the magnitude of welfare distribution points that our like schools contain.
Sure.
Like it was very evident early in 2020 how dangerous it was to keep schools closed because of the impact on poor families. Like it was pronounced and significant in the words of the people that were dealing with folks on a daily basis. Like, so I think our schools opened in the first semester, generally around the first semester of 2021. By fall of 2020, there still was kind of that hesitancy, and it was because, okay, in my mind, I'm sitting here listening in my psyoped brain, having fallen victim to all the propaganda of you talking about the disease vectors of school and how that's good and how that's great. I'm thinking, well, what about the teachers? What about the kids that are going home and infecting their parents? And wouldn't we overwhelm the hospitals? Like, wouldn't there have been a risk to doing, to opening schools sooner and harming people, Dr. Larson?
There's always a risk of that. I think, I think the problem we have with this pandemic is the fact that there's an inevitability to it, in the sense that you can't prevent what's going to happen. You can only change the timing in when it happens, right? So had we not had any restrictions, would it have significantly impacted hospital capacity? Or would it just have changed the timing of it? And probably it just would have changed the timing. I
don't even know if I agree with you.
We're not even Europe. Right?
Right.
I don't think we're not Europe. We're not poor. We're not as poor as other parts of the world. We have a lot of hospital capacity. We have a lot of things. There were so many other things that we could have done at our hospital, which, with hands down, got really busy multiple times. We still have people with COVID in our hospitals and ICUs, and so it's still a problem in our hospital system, as we're just kind of clearing people out eventually, right? As they get over it, and this is not to minimize, of course, the fact that there's a lot of disease and a lot of morbidity. There's a lot of problems that happen to this, but this is also that would have happened anyway. And I think that's a difficult thing. People who were at highest risk, we knew right away early on who they were. They're the elderly. They're people who are in poor physical condition. So what could you have done differently? I think you would have opened schools in the fall. You would have said, if you were someone at risk, fix yourself. I mean, the number one message, there's no therapeutics. Well, there were therapeutics that people have talked about, and I think with varying success. Being physically active, losing weight, not smoking. I mean, those sorts of things are obvious, and they were the most important things. It's probably why we've had more deaths per capita than most countries in the world, because I think we're just very sick people in general.
I have no doubt that at 330 pounds, like in 2012, had I gotten COVID, I would have died. Like, it was that Delta was a significant test of my heart and my lungs, and like and my brain. Still not totally back. I have no doubt, but there was a number early on in New York City that was locked down, and 50% of the patients were people who hadn't left their house. I'm just sort of like vaguely remember that fact. I don't know that restrictions were ever necessary, because I don't know that anybody followed them. Like, here in Indiana, nobody followed the rules. Like, I mean, I was inconvenienced one time. I couldn't go in BW3s because it was at 30% capacity. Mm-hmm. That was the one singular time in Indiana that I ever faced like issues. And were the numbers that much better in Michigan than they were here? And if you look at the numbers, cases per 100,000 or deaths per 100,000, they're pretty much, it moves regionally, right? And you don't see much as far as restrictions. They made very little difference from one state to the next, right? Indiana, if anything, we had more restrictions, and we had more problems in Indiana. And I don't exactly understand why that is, if it's Detroit or because maybe some more international travel. I don't know. But we seem to have a couple extra outbreaks that other states in the Midwest didn't have. Yeah.
There's definitely randomness to this sort of thing. But I guess the point is there's an inevitability to being infected and to have it break out. And we can not like it. We can want it to go away. We can feel like there's something we should be doing. But ultimately, there's oftentimes nothing you can do, right? Yeah. Like, you can't stop it from snowing, right? I mean, there are some things that you just can't do. And it's hard for us as politicians, as voters, as citizens, physicians.
Empathetic people.
Right. Because we don't want to be suffering. And people will be listening, say, my aunt died or whatever, and this is a terrible thing. How can you so callously say we should just let it rip, right? That's always the term. Ultimately, that's what happened anyway. And because as much as we say we lock down, your point is very valid in that sense. You don't really lock things down. You can't. If you lock things down 100%, everybody would die, right? I don't have a garden in my backyard. At some point, I got to get seeds. Someone's got to get the seeds to me. How are they going to get the seeds to me? Well, they have to meet some person to get a seed to get to the truck to get to me. There's still going to be transmission for something as infectious as this. There's no way you can have a society that's totally locked down. It's easy for people who can work at home and can be pretty much isolated from everybody, for them to say, yeah, lock everything down, it doesn't bother me, because they are going to have all these services delivered to them and provided for them with little risk to them, little contact to the outside world. And yes, they can get by, but most people can't.
Yeah.
I mean, they may suffer in other ways by the fact they have limited interaction with other people. I consider myself quite an introvert, and I was staying like late at work just talking to people because I wasn't seeing people. I wasn't talking to them. And so I'm lucky in that sense that I had to go in and see people all the time. I can't do anesthesia from my home. I have to go in and actually take care of patients. And I think the hardest thing about this is, of course, there's no easy answer. There's no way. You can't prove a counterfactual. You can't say it would have been better or worse had we done things differently.
Right.
I think, though, once we had the vaccine, by June of last year, I put out a thing about is COVID Independence Day, and it absolutely should have been. They were at that point, anyone who wanted protection was going to have maximum protection. There would have been no reason to have any further restrictions because it would have, now you're only delaying what is going to happen anyway. Kids are all going to get it. Whether the kids are vaccinated or not, it doesn't matter. They're going to be okay. I mean, I think that's fundamentally
I think
the case.
of the 900 to million people in America that have died, 900 children have died.
Yeah, and you know, when you investigate that more, there are kids who are special needs kids. They're oftentimes kids who have other. I mean, it's very, very unusual for a kid who's like totally healthy, like no obesity, no underlying diabetes. It's tragic. I've lost a child myself, so I know what it's like going through losing a kid. So I understand that, but I also recognize losing my son. I have a greater appreciation for life.
Yeah,
and I do things now differently than I did before. I value experiences more than I did before. And so like I pull my kid out of school and we're at the Big Ten tournament, not because I don't think algebra is important, but it's because I think us having a family time bonding together over, you know, it's basketball, but whatever. I think it's important. I have a foster son who had a kidney transplant. And so he is immunocompromised. He's at risk. And someone early on said to us, you know, what are you going to do with him? Because, you know, he was working at Culver's at the time and he's got another job. The kid works like crazy. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, are you worried about him? I was like, yeah, of course. But he got a kidney transplant, not so he could live in the basement. It's so he could live life. And to your point earlier, we all make calculations of risk, what we think risks are. And I think people very wisely recognize early on, like, I'm 35. Everybody who's dying is like 75 or 80 for the most part. They're unhealthy. There are the unfortunate people who, for whatever reason, they may be more susceptible to this who pass away. But it's a very low percentage. I can not live for a couple of years because I think it was evident early on that this is going to last a while. I mean, if you looked at it. So you have to just make the decision just to live. And I wish I could say you could live a risk-free life. I mean, that's what I'd love to say, but hell, nothing's risk-free. I mean, my son died in a car accident. I mean, and you have to get in cars. It's unreasonable. I recognize people who are, I don't want to say safety freaks, but people who are concerned about safety issues. But I tell you what, you're not here very long, and you want to spend time with people that's important and make those relationships, because that's really what life's about. You know, relationships with each other and doing things and accomplishing things that make you happy to leave the world hopefully a little better than it was when you came in.
Yeah, you have the ability to exercise, eat better, prepare yourself, get the vaccine. And it's been a hallmark of this show forever. You are not guaranteed to walk back in the front door when you exit it. Like there is no guarantee that the government can keep you safe. The best the government could do is $1,200 and lock down seed aisles, right? Like you are living in risk all the time. And, you know, for people, I'll be candid. I'm not, my dad didn't come to my wedding in December. Everybody who attended the wedding, vaccinated or unvaccinated, had Delta within the month and a half before, and he had the booster. He still didn't want to make the trip to Florida and back, right? Now, maybe there were other reasons, I don't know, but COVID was the excuse. He's still wearing masks when he comes to events. And it doesn't, like, my brother works for a major pharmaceutical company, right? Like, my sister was very progressive, I guess, on COVID stuff until she got it. And I, early on, I was like, yeah, I get it. But, like, 2 years in, when you've got a booster and everybody has natural immunity and literally nobody's in danger, why are you acting this way? Why are you more afraid now than you were when you didn't have the vaccine? That's the part that I've not come to grips with, because you should be going the other way. You should be like 2020. I got it the second or third week it hit Indiana. Okay, well, I have a layer of protection because natural immunity exists. Mm-hmm. And it kind of summer, people are getting it a second time, which made sense. So when the vaccine comes out and they're telling me my natural immunity doesn't hold up, well, then why will your vaccine natural immunity hold up, right? Like, but there is some level of T cell response. How do you look at people like, my dad, who kind of are not comfortable yet?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, I think it has fed into my frustration, I think, this year that people, especially people, policymakers, and people who are thought leaders, and that would be, Fauci and public health officials. They're the thought leaders when it comes to this, to infectious disease, in order to call off the dogs, right? And I think they're the ones who can say, they can just say rationally, like, there's going to be risk, you're going to get this, but that message has not been delivered. And so,
right.
And so for people like your dad, I think, whenever you encounter these people, I think you have to meet them with empathy, because they have legitimate fears. I mean, it did kill a lot of people. There's no question about it. I mean, it's not like we're arguing about whether something really happened or not.
I mean,
right?
I remember when Donald Trump said, well, 100,000, 200,000 people are going to die. And I was like, how are we going to let 200,000 people die in sugar? Like, that was an unconscionable number. Like, Ulsterholm went on Rogan in March and said 800,000 people globally will die of this. And like, that was just crazy pants in terms of a number. And 6 million are dead now.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's, I get your point. I mean, it's certainly, especially if you're like my dad, who's in his 60s, he's healthy. Like, if he gets it, it's going to be like my Omicron experience, which, by the way, I have no idea how I got Omicron. I mean, we didn't leave the house. We hadn't gone anywhere. We think maybe her from daycare, like.
Well, but see, this is exactly
you know what I mean?
Point to why lockdowns would work, right? Because you weren't like totally in your house,
right?
You still have human contact,
right?
And if you you could have 100 human contacts with someone, and if one time that person is very infectious, you're going to get it. You could have 1,000 if no one's infectious, well, then you don't get it, right? I mean, it's just like it's a total crapshoot whether you get it or not. I mean, to your dad, I mean, right now, if you are really worried about it, you can wear an N95 if you have it properly fitted, which means you can never wear one because you've got a beard. You can never have a properly fitted mask. So you have to make it properly fitted N95. You can pretty much walk around with impunity as long as you're changing that N95 frequently, which probably most people aren't. And so you can mask just yourself, and it doesn't matter what everyone else is doing. You can still do whatever you want. And yeah, you'll have to experience the derision or the sideline long looks of people who are like, what's this guy wearing a mask at? He's outside like at a 4th of July festival. But you can still do that if you really are concerned. And I don't think people at this point are going to, I think people cut you some slack.
Yeah.
It's as long as you're not restricting them from what they're doing. I mean, this is like libertarianism, man, right?
Right.
Like, as long as you're not restricting me and making me do things that are pointless or silly, right? Then I'm okay. If you want to wear a mask all the time, all right, fine. I mean, make sure you're not robbing my bank or something. But for the most part, I don't care.
Your central planning will fail. This won't work. Like that was the message from the beginning. Like,
yeah,
okay, you guys can try this if you want, but it's not going to work because we can't control nature.
Right. And I guarantee your dad will get SARS-CoV-2. Right. No matter what he does. No matter how much he wears his mask, because he's not going to wear his mask 100% of the time everywhere. He's not going to wear it properly. I can't tell you how many people I see walking around with their N95s on, and they're not properly fitted. Like, if I can see your skin beyond that mask, behind it, it's not sealed. Right? I mean,
like, it needs to be like hurting your face type.
It just needs to be. I mean, if you think about it, let's say you had everyone puts leftover food in a box, right, in a container in the fridge. Well, if the lid's not snapped shut, it's going to spoil, right? So if it's not airtight, it's not airtight. I mean, it's not that complicated.
You got to put the pizza into the Ziploc bag, because if you put the box into the refrigerator, the pizza gets dried out.
If those blue and yellow don't turn green, that Ziploc's not sealed, right? I mean, and so the N95 is the same way. It's not super complicated. And even then with an N95, you're still at risk for getting things. I mean, it's not like you'd have to have a full-blown those hazmat suits to really be 100% sure. Like, if you knew you're working on sarin gas, you're not wearing an N95, right? You're wearing a hazmat suit. So I don't know. I mean, I think the way you treat it is you say, if you insist on protection, you can protect yourself. If you insist your kids being protected, but you cannot expect at this point for the rest of the world to adapt and to change their behavior in order to make you feel comfortable. And I think that's what we're doing. And what we're doing to our kids in many places, not now in Michigan as much, but in places, I see these, it's almost like a different universe. You see people in New York, being kids to eat lunch outside, or, well, now you don't have to wear masks outside. Well, that never made sense. For how? I mean, no one thought that made any sense for a year and a half. Why at my hospital you don't have drinking fountains that are operational?
Right.
What I don't understand what the point is. Are there lines? Are there like crowds of people around drinking fountains before? Do you remember that ever happening? Well, no wonder there's lots of transmission of COVID. We have drinking fountains open. People are lined up for a mile, but we have people drinking all the time. And there's so many things that we have policies, and this is the problem, right? When you have a central top-down policy, it takes a long time to remove these policies.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be the guy to remove it because, well, let's say you say, oh, we're going to, now you no longer have to wear masks. Well, now there's an outbreak because it happens by chance anyway. Well, is it due because the mask mandate got repealed? Well, if so, then we're going to blame the guy who just got rid of it. So there's the impetus is to keep things as they are because people have kind of gotten used to them, right? And so it's very long to get rid of these dumb policies. Like Biden administration and the TSA, they're going to keep the mask mandate for public transportation, both trains and buses and planes.
The military and every airline says it's safe in their filtration systems in the plane.
And even if it weren't, again, everyone who has wanted to get vaccinated and to have protection has had the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
So what are you doing at this point? Preventing infections makes no sense. We would never spend all this effort to prevent people from getting, I don't know, like a regular cold, like an adenovirus. That's what we're doing right now. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. If you are someone who is really concerned, you can isolate yourself. You can wear the mask if you're really worried. I don't know. At this point, I think we're just spinning wheels and people are just unwilling to let go. And because I think if you let go completely, you're admitting the fact that the last 9 months is kind of silly.
A lot of people have business models based on sharing Robert Malone information or sharing
Yes.
Dr. Fauci's information. A lot of people have a lot invested, and they're very upset about this war because it's taken their bread and butter off the front pages. It's taken, the views are going to go down as people move on. Like, there's a reason there are no significant pieces of culture out of the Spanish flu. Because and if you read that influenza book that I recommended early in the pandemic, by John Barry, Philadelphia was like the hot zone for all the leaders lied about the pandemic, and so they like turned on them. Anti-mask league stuff, like we're all doing the same things over and over. So if history is your guide, then you have to look back and go, okay, if there's no culture out of one of the worst events in American history, and we didn't realize it till we had our own pandemic, and the answer is that nobody wanted to relive the worst years of their lives, we're going to do the same thing. So there's a lot of people like desperately trying to drag us, or they're going to just transfer the PSYOP stuff to Putin and not like I don't know. You're a consumer of information, like and have followed a lot of this stuff closely. Like when you look at the Ukraine situation and kind of the flow of information, I mean, it's been a couple weeks and now positions are already hardened. I see a lot of the same information flow mechanisms just kind of carrying over into that stuff. Like you are now 2 weeks into it, you have to choose a side. You either pro Zelensky and pro Ukraine, no matter what, can't question it, or America, this is all America's fault and Putin is just a victim. Right? They're those same kind of sides and groups of people like are just carrying that. Like when we talk about how information kind of has flowed around this stuff, like how do you sort what's been true? How do you know what is true? I mean, obviously your medical training probably has something to do with it. But
sure. Well,
how do you the question I get most often, I guess this is what I'll ask you, is how do I know if this is true or not?
Yeah.
How have you managed that? How have you kind of sorted through that?
I mean, I think it's like any sort of medical truisms, right? I think you have experimental data, you have observational data, and I think you can use that to reach conclusions that are reasonable, right? I think observationally, most people know someone who has been very sick from COVID, but we don't know like thousands of people sick from COVID, right? I mean, like, unless you live in a nursing home, right? So I think those are important. I think when you look at the data as far as where cases move and how they flow, I think you can see that there's very little difference from one region to the next. In fact, it's more related to the region. Like no matter what the policies are in California, Nevada, and Arizona, they pretty much have the same case counts. Same thing in the South, right? I mean, so I think you look at those sorts of things. And then I think it's really challenging because there are so many people who are grifters on both sides and there are people, there are industries, large industries that make a lot of money in this process. Like, why do you think universities had such huge testing policy? I think in part, it's because they were sold from testing companies. You need to do all these. You need to do all this. I can't think of the term. Contact tracing for students. So and testing companies love it because they get to sell a lot of tests. I'm not saying that they came up with the pandemic, they invented it or something, but they push things to say, well, this is a way to control it. And you're like, well, I guess if you're a university administrator.
Was it the federal government or the $10 million in advertising to these mainstream media outlets to push the vaccine?
Yeah, right. I mean, there's definitely money to be made in the vaccine with no liability. There's no question about that. Do the vaccines work? Yes. Are they as effective as they were sort of initially pushed? No. I mean, in the sense that they don't prevent you from getting sick, right? We know that eventually it wanes like your natural immunity would, which is exactly what you'd expect. But there's definitely financial moneyed interest in those sorts of things. And so I think that helps push the narrative as well. And they have a voice. And because whenever anyone's scared, you can kind of push things a lot easier. And I think with the war, the fact that there are nuclear weapons on one side, it makes it much more newsworthy. No one cares about Yemen, right? And people die in Yemen for, 20 years now? I don't even know how long it's been. It's been forever since...
At least 10, yeah.
Right. So
it's past Holocaust numbers in terms of the genocide there.
Yeah. I mean, I think the same instruments of propaganda or information that was used in the pandemic have been used before. It's used now. And then when the Ukraine situation, and I think when it comes to the United States, we always try and we try. I guess we're narcissists. It's always about us, and I think what's going on in Ukraine and Russia has almost nothing.
Gas prices. Okay?
It has almost nothing to do with the United States, right? Like my barber asked me, "What do you think about Ukraine and Russia?" He's like, and I said, "I don't know," and I'll be honest because I live 27 hours from walking from Indiana, 2 hours from the border.
Right.
I don't know the name of your governor, and I think I'm a fairly I don't know. I'm up in politics and stuff. I don't know what people in Indiana care about. I don't even know what a Hoosier is. So for me to suddenly expect that I'm going to understand the history, the culture, and the politics of Ukraine and Russia, I don't know how any American can expect to know that. So I don't even try and pretend that I know. All I know is I don't want people to be dying for something, and I don't know why it's happening. I've have vague ideas why it happened. I've listened to people who've gone through histories of U.S. involvement and what's gone in Russia and Ukraine. So I feel like I'm semi-informed enough to know that, like everything in life, it's nuanced, right? It's not just one side or the other. I don't have a Ukrainian flag and I don't have a Russian flag in my Twitter handle, right?
Well,
profile.
If you did, it'd really help. It'd really help if you lit your house up with the blue and gold. Yeah, I got this message from I've talked a little bit about the Russian couple that I met on my honeymoon, and they weren't really politically. They didn't want to talk about Putin. They didn't really know. The one thing that they were interested in is what's with the cancel culture. That was the thing that they knew about America's government is the cancel culture. And I was talking to my Russian friends because they're about to lose Instagram. And, she wrote, "We are civilians and we are not interested in politics. We are very surprised by what is happening. We do not want Russia and Ukraine to fight. It is also obvious that no one will compromise. We are afraid for the future. We haven't watched the news in 10 years. We don't understand anything. We don't understand why this is happening." Dee's father says everything was planned long ago by the USA. His father said in 95, the Ukrainian military asked him if he would fight with Russia. We were just watching. We don't know what to do. So yeah, that Russian friend sounds exactly like you. It's like, well, my country probably isn't really at fault, but I don't really like, so I don't know. I guess, it's just, I think the vaccine, let's kind of talk about the vaccine because I don't think you and I have had a chance to really discuss it. I mean, I know more people that have had adverse reactions to the vaccine than I do COVID. And I know that's a controversial thing to say. It's totally anecdotal. Who knows? They may be going, well, I had this tumor on my foot for 4 years and then I got the vaccine and now it's a super tumor, right? I don't, right. You don't know if people are telling you the truth, but there are legitimate, one friend got Bell's palsy after their second shot. The second shot and the booster seem to have caused issues. I mean, how have you approached talking about the vaccine based on just I don't want to talk about it, right? Because I feel like you with Ukraine, like I'm completely unqualified to talk about it, but I do have questions. Like I know people have had adverse reactions. I don't like that I'm not allowed to say that out loud without being shouted down.
Anti-vaxxer.
Right. That seems weird to me.
Yeah.
Right. So, people, I was listening to this game theory podcast about Ukraine that was really interesting. And she was talking about like people make decisions based on changing states. So, and she listed this. She's like, your average person in the United States that's kind of like 35 doesn't want to change states because the information has made this like this big moral choice. Mm-hmm. And so I'm currently fine, or I've had COVID and I'm okay and I'm in a good state and I'd probably be fine if I catch COVID. But if I get the vaccine, then that's a changing of the state, right? I could have this happen. So it's almost like playing poker with yourself. Getting the vaccine, something could happen, something, right? And in a lot of ways, that question, I think, for a lot of our listeners has become bigger than what happens if I get COVID, especially with Omicron. Like Delta, for me, that scared me because, like, you saw how I saw people having bad reactions. I had a terrible reaction that took me months to recover from. So in your experience, watching people get the vaccine, watching people get COVID from kind of an overarching view, plus being in the trenches at a hospital, how did you approach that choice, and what information did you have that maybe I don't have, just kind of as a dude sitting around reading Twitter?
So I'll begin just by, this is more a general medicine sort of discussion here. So ultimately, statistically, something happening to you is 0 or 100. The chance something happened to you is not 43%. That's a population chance of something happening, right? And that's always a tricky thing in medicine. So when I'm trying to talk to someone, a patient before anesthesia, and I'm trying to go through the risks of things, I can give them percentages of but ultimately it doesn't mean it's meaningless. If I tell you there's a 1% chance something happened, you're like, I don't know, does that mean it's going to happen? Or the magnitude of it happening, is that something I need to worry about? So I will tell them things like, you're young, healthy. The things that are likely are, maybe a sore, scratchy throat from a endotracheal tube. You're going to probably have some decent chance of nausea. We'll give you some medicine to treat those things. The sore throat resolves on its own. Everything that you worry about, awareness during anesthesia, strokes, heart attacks, those sorts of things, they're not 0, but your chance of probably not making it here or making it back home is probably greater. So if you think twice getting in the car, you should think twice getting anesthesia, from the serious significant side effects. And that people are like, oh, okay. And that tends to put people at ease. But of course, your chance of getting a car accident is really 0 or 100, right? You either you will or you won't. And so I can't ever say something's not going to happen. So then when it comes to vaccines, I think this is the important thing is you have to look at population to get an idea for, in general, what is your risk? What is your chance of something bad happening? Because that's what you really want to know. Yes, it's 0 or 100, but ultimately you want to know, is it likely or not likely? Is it happening to lots of people or is it not happening to lots of people, right? That's kind of what you sort of try and figure out. And I think it's just ingenuous for us to say there's no risk to a vaccine. There's always a risk. There are unknown risks. There are things that could happen that we don't understand. You also have to put that up against the risks of not having a vaccine, right? So there's a risk to that too. So there's a risk for hospitalization, morbidity from maybe you have permanent heart disease or lung disease from getting COVID without having prior protection with a vaccine. I don't know. I can't know those things. It's also possible those things won't manifest for many years, maybe 10, 20 years. Maybe you get a heart attack at 60 when you would have had at 70. We could never know that.
Right.
There are all kinds of infectious diseases that we get all the time that maybe they cause these problems years and years down the road. All the time, patients are trying to attribute things that happened to them to something that happened to them recently. That's a natural thing by any human being, right? My hamstring hurts a ton. What did I do yesterday that made my hamstring hurt, right? It wasn't that I just did something a while ago and now I did some little thing and that was the last straw that broke the camel's back, right? So to speak. We see that all the time with back injuries. Someone goes down to lift, picks a piece of paper off the floor and they throw out their back.
Right.
Well, it wasn't that piece of paper that obviously did it. It's like the 150 injuries before that got you to the point where just one little thing got you.
I pee a lot every day, and you said, well, you're too young to have a prostate issue. I said, no, I drink a gallon of water a day, right? And so, but, in my mind, every time I go pee, I'm like, well, this is it. It's prostate cancer. But the real reality at 38, it's not. It's just that I drink a gallon of water a day.
I'd be more concerned if you weren't peeing a gallon. You should, if you consume a gallon, you should pretty much pee out a gallon.
Right.
That means your kidney's working. Great.
Right.
So when it comes to other risks, like most risks that you have to worry about, adverse events with vaccines, are going to occur very soon within the time period of that. Now, that also goes, you have to take into account that fact that things happen to people all the time. That person who's going to have a heart attack, they're going to have a heart attack whether they had the vaccine the day before or the day after, right? And so people talk about this all the time. These events are happening, and it's because of the vaccine. I'm in the ER, I'm a nurse, and I see all these people with maybe that's true, maybe they're really a nurse, right? The things you see on Twitter all the time, it's hard to know what's true. People disparage the VARES system in that for vaccine adverse events system. And it is not perfect by any means. However, a lot of things have been found, but I think the clot formation after the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that was a very rare event, but they found that. I think with the myocarditis with boys, that has been detected and picked up by VAERS, and it's also been seen elsewhere in the world. So there are definitely risks to getting the vaccine. I think they're very, very small, and I would say in general, the risk is incredibly small. And then I think you just have to see what's your risk to getting a bad reaction to COVID. Well, it probably depends who you are, what your physical shape is, how many times you've had COVID. These are the discussions that I think we're not having. And I think this is a problem with, I don't know if you want to call it centrally planned public health, that there's not any nuance allowed within the scope of it, right? Like everybody has to wear a mask or no one has to wear a mask. Or, everybody has to get vaccinated or no one has to get vaccinated. Initially with the vaccine rollout, it would make much more sense saying, hey, have you had COVID? Why don't you wait for someone who hasn't had COVID to get vaccinated first? Yeah. That would have made more sense. If people said, well, I don't know. Did I have COVID? Well, we'll test you, right? We'll see if you have antibodies. We could have had a nuanced approach to that at that point. We could have spread out the doses. There are all kinds of different things we could have done had we been willing to have an honest conversation about the disease. And I think not having those discussions hurt credibility later on, because it became very evident later on that some things were true. You do have immunity from being infected with COVID. Well, that was kind of like, to be denying that possibility seems crazy.
He hadn't, like Fauci said recently, they hadn't even researched it. So you're doing all this research in the greatest global pandemic, and you haven't done any research on natural immunity's effect on the disease. Like, that didn't make any sense to people. Like, why wouldn't you research natural immunity? And that's, I think, why a lot of people look at it and it's reasonable to go, well, it's a cash grab. Like,
yeah, it's not a reason. And on some level, maybe a little bit of it is.
Yeah.
But yes, the fact that there's so much basic science that was ignored, like, immunity from viruses, that is a known thing. How long it lasts? Well, we don't know. But we can say, well, let's see, there are 4 other common endemic coronaviruses. And this is a discussion I had with David Graham back in April of 2020. We know you get immunity from that, and then at some point it wanes over time. And you can't have antibodies that last forever. The fact that we have people who are prominent immunologists talking about how we have to monitor antibody levels forever was totally insane, because you can't have antibodies to every single thing you've been infected with, because I think I talked to you before. If you had that much protein in your blood, it'd be like molasses. You would die. So your body naturally gets rid of that, keeps a bank of what you've had infected so it can ramp up antibody production quickly later. That's how we're designed. So it's possible that we wouldn't form antibodies. It's possible that none of that stuff would happen with this new, but the default, what you expect is that you would. And that's what Sweden's approach was. They said, we expect that people will get this, they'll get over it. And, that's, I think, how it's played out. I think they look smarter than we did in the fact that we're denying things that were basic fundamentals knowledge that we had in medicine that we just, for some reason, said, forget it.
We didn't. So I've not looked up, but was Sweden's numbers that much different than other places? I know they were touted early on as like the geniuses.
I think Sweden is, so it's from a health standpoint, they're really no different than Europe. I think they're middle of the pack, maybe even a little bit better. When you look at Nordic countries, they're pretty much the same as everybody else. I think except Norway, for whatever reason, Norway has, when you look at excess deaths, Norway is very different. I think this is one of the tricky things too with COVID, in that it's going to take a long time to really ferret out. And I think you have a lot of people who disingenuously, or at least look for the findings that they want. And I think,
right.
And you're going to have that
with
for a long
Sweden,
time.
for instance, it was, the people who would naturally have been against Sweden early on were like, look, their death numbers are way higher or their case numbers are way higher, and then the people who are like Sweden, it's genius, then they're no different than other people. It's like,
yes.
So I just never looked like at a certain point. You're just like, I don't have time for this. I'm trying to get married.
Right, and look at you can look at Belgium had the worst death rates of COVID anywhere in Europe, but they had probably the most robust reporting and testing system in Europe. So you're going to pick up every single case, right? And so other countries may not be as good at testing or not test as many people, and so I don't know. I mean.
Russia said they did better than us, and they had 4 times the amount of people die. And that was one thing that Trump got right. He always got some things right, but said it inarticulately. Well, when you test too much and you track all the cases, then you have more like it's worse. It looks worse on paper because you're more informed, right? Like, but that's a good thing because then we have better information to make risk calculations. Yeah, I guess with the vaccine, so it sounds like your risk isn't zero, but just because there is risk and because there is a cash grab element and because like it does work, it's I think that's where people get stuck. It's because they look at these things that are kind of true, like the hallmark of Russian propaganda, keep this in mind with Ukraine, is very Goebbels-like. It's to take they say the opposite of what their opponents say, repeat it loudly to sow doubt, so you don't know what's true or not. And then they'll take something like the bombing of a hospital, and America has bombed hospitals in the past. There's a famous one at Kirkuk, I think, in Iraq, that was an accidental bombing. But that doesn't compare to the hundreds of hospitals bombed in Ukraine over the last 2 weeks, right? Like, so they'll take the one and go, what about, right? Like, so so just the information with the vaccine, for instance, becomes, well, I know these people who had this, and I know that this doesn't make sense from a cash grab perspective, and it almost becomes like a choice, a control issue. You're trying to control me by making me get a vaccine so I can go see the Documents of Freedom in Washington, D.C. So my choice for control is to say no as a protest. So there's all these things that kind of like make sense to me in why people wouldn't want to get it. But you're saying, like, don't let those pieces of information discount the fact that it does help, it did work.
Yes, and I would say that physicians, public health officials, government officials are very human. We all have our inherent biases, what our expectations are, how we think the world works. We have a framework for how decisions are made, how things happen, and that clouds everything that we see as far as information, how we process it. Right? People who are insistent there's a smoky room with a bunch of people rubbing their hands together, think it's a new world order, are going to immediately think that, oh, this is all part of a giant conspiracy. Likewise, people think everyone in the government's got white hats on, assumes everything the government says and does is the right thing and just, right? And so I think I was very skeptical for a lot of this process, and I think I have reason to be considered correct. Likewise, people who think the other also were correct in many ways too, right? And so the world's very nuanced, but we are all susceptible to it. So just because someone has 10 initials after their name doesn't mean that they have the right answers. There probably is no right answer anyway. Oftentimes, I mean, maybe it's a little too postmodern, but I think it's very. I think it's important to recognize that the world's nuance. It's gray. It's gray, and there's not a right or wrong. There's not one decision you make may be the wrong one, and there's nothing you do about it. It's just you do the best you can with the information you have. You try not to punish other people. I mean, I'd like to think we'd all just treat each other with empathy and when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, I'm pro-peace. I'm pro-people. I don't want people dying. I don't care what the reason is. I just want it to end. And
it was kind of like, I'll wear a mask in your restaurant if you want me to wear a mask.
Yeah.
It doesn't really, I'm not going to wear it but that's sort of where I came down. It's like what now? If you want me to be vaccinated to come into your place, like you shouldn't invade my bodily autonomy to that level, but a mask, okay, right? Like there's certain levels to it that, that nuance that you sort of have to go, all right, I get it.
It's a personal choice. I mean, at this point, I avoid any business that makes me wear a mask. I'm like, I'm done wearing the talisman.
Right.
Right. I mean, I know it doesn't do anything. So
to explain that, and Commentary has a really good podcast that I listen to, and they're all Jewish. And so John Potter's was saying, like, Omicron is like, we have sinned. You have to put the talisman back on, because go back to your talisman to wash away your sin. Like, because you've been infected, you're dirty and unclean. Like, so it's a very funny, like, true thing that people have made on almost a religious icon, that they think, like, this comfort blanket over my face that's made out of, doesn't matter how long we've known that a cloth mask. I remember, like, early on, you're like, oh, this is cute. People are making cloth masks, and you'd share the link.
Yeah.
Hey, if you want to buy one, and then you'd have, this doesn't work. And,
cloth face diapers, chin straps, right?
Right. And then those same people are like, put on your mask. All right. So do you think endemic, what does that mean? What does the future of COVID look like? Do we have bigger spikes? Are we kind of, not Scott Atlas, for goodness sake. The FDA director.
Walensky?
No, the former FDA director, Pfizer board. He's kind of been right on a lot of this stuff.
Scott Gottlieb?
Gottlieb, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Said that this was the final big wave. Where do you think COVID goes from here?
Okay, so endemic means that it's a virus that will be with us within the human population for eternity, unless we find some way to remove it entirely, which is unlikely.
Because you told me we still have the Spanish flu in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, all the things, there are only two viruses that have ever been eradicated. Smallpox and, it's... Is
it polio?
No, it's not. No, polio is still around. That's why we still get vaccinated for polio, because it still exists in, like, Afghanistan, ironically, until... And I think now we're almost at the point where anyway, it's a kind of long story, but so we still have polio. It's smallpox, and there's another, I can't think of what it is right now, but it's a virus you never heard of. But SARS-CoV-2 will join the other 4 coronaviruses. It already has, really, effectively. And so we'll have 5 endemic coronaviruses that you'll be infected with from time to time. And so you get the other 4 you don't even know, OC43 and the other 3. You get adenoviruses, rhinoviruses, and we'll continue to have waves of massive infections within communities. That will always happen. That's never going to go away. It doesn't matter how many times you get vaccinated, how many times you get boosted. There's no question about that. But it's not going to matter. It in the sense that it won't matter unless you actually are testing for it and altering your policy based on it. There are still people who will be susceptible to it, probably for the rest of their lives, or at least for the next couple infections. As you develop a more robust immunity, it'll become less of a problem to you unless you become frail. And so when you're sick, I mean, when you're sick, when you're 95 years old and you get a cold, you can die from it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to die from something. And so that will always be part of us. Part of the human condition is having these viruses. So SARS-CoV-2 will always be around. At some point, we're going to stop testing for it. And at some point, we're just going to stop paying attention to it. That's a public health or political decision that's got to be made at some point, that we're just going to stop caring that people have it. We're almost to that point now. I mean, we're to the point now where the hospitals are no longer giving you extra sick pay for having COVID and staying home. We're still testing for it, at least in my institution, most of the ones I know in Michigan, for preoperatively for surgery. But we're getting to the point now where just about everyone's had it or has baseline immunity. So you're kind of like, it's sort of like a regular cold. So if you have a regular cold, you come in for elective surgery, we're going to cancel you.
Yeah.
But if you haven't had it for a couple of weeks, you haven't gone to the hospital or anything, we probably don't care. A lot of our studies showing that it did make a difference, well, those are kind of with a naive immune system study. So like people who never had it before, so they definitely got more sick. But now that everyone's had it, especially as kids, they're going to get it multiple times in their lifetime. And so it's just going to not be a thing. And I think back to when you were talking about the cultural references, I have yet to see a single movie or TV show or anything that has people wearing masks in it.
Yeah.
The only popular culture that has masks are commercials.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. It's going to be like this never happened. It's going to be very strange, but it's going to be like we'll remember it, but there'll be like no recorded, maybe so you'll find like printed ads or something, but there's really going to be almost no recollection.
Which I've seen a lot of people on Twitter really mad about that. They're going to get away with it, which I totally get. Like, you killed people with bad policy. Same with 2008. Same with the Iraq War. Nobody's going to jail for anything.
Nope.
Nobody's going to be held accountable. And now they're just moving on to the war, and the same people who made the same bad decisions will make bad decisions with this, and they're never going to get away with it. Like, and so, I don't know. I guess it just is what it's just.
Welcome to life.
Welcome to the government.
Welcome to the world.
Right.
I mean, this is the way, right? I mean, life's not fair. Life doesn't always work out the way you want it to be. All right. And, that's why you lean on your faith, or you lean on other people, and you do your best. I don't know. I mean, I wish I could say it turns out best. I like to think that just like Lord of the Rings, Mordor is going to go down at the end, but maybe I'm not here when that end happens.
So where does Paradox go from here, now that we're kind of past this emergency?
I think we'll talk about COVID occasionally, just when it comes to, because some people just won't let it go, and talk about the implications. But COVID really has not been the focus of the show. It never was meant to be. It has, just because every third or fourth episode, I was trying to keep it to a minimum.
Because at some point, what are you going to talk about?
The show was launched in order to look at the healthcare system in the United States and its dysfunction, and people who are finding innovative ways of solving problems. And that's what we do. I've been spending a lot of time talking about the credentialing boards recently, which, again, for people who are in the weeds who are physicians, find it interesting because they understand what's going wrong and ways that people are finding ways around fixing those problems. And if you're a patient, you're like, why are my doctors, why are they retiring when they're 57 or 58? Well, I kind of talk about why the burnout happens. So that's something we focus on: the third-party payment system, direct contracting. I think ways that are really going to transform healthcare in this country. It's not going to be a sweeping legislation. I mean, unless some sweeping legislation happens soon, the way that's going to change is people are just fed up with it because it's so expensive. And so anyway, I think those are things I focus on, and that's where I find it interesting within the healthcare space. And then other issues like brain death and organ harvesting and stuff like that.
Oh, fun!
Every once in a while, we delve into the sort of the ethical issues in medicine, which I think are interesting. I think, and so I try and find stuff that I find interesting, and I think people find what I find interesting who listen, so they just listen. I don't know. I think it has a little bit something for everybody. Occasionally, maybe not every issue is going to be something that you're going to be fine, but you may find that stuff that you never thought about before, didn't even know existed, is there. I talked to Chris Deacon actually recently, a couple episodes ago. She transformed New Jersey's health and benefits. It saved billions of dollars. I mean, she actually went in and reformed state government. And so it's not like impossible. There are things people are doing that actually make problems better. And so, I don't know, I just try and highlight those people and look for those stories and things I find interesting until I stop finding things interesting. Then I guess I'll just do something else.
Shameless self-plug time. Where can people find you? How can people listen?
Well, the fantastic We Are Libertarians Network, you can go to the feed, and you can, I think, just type in We Are Libertarians, and it'll just show up there.
It's on there. You click on the button on the sidebar.
There was all this Chris Spangle show too is on there, I think, too. You can go to the Paradocs, and it's spelled different, so it's a plain word. It says Paradocs, because I usually talk to another doctor, but not always, but most of the time. And so the Paradox.com is the website. You can go to find the Paradox show on Twitter and on. I think I have an Instagram page, but I'm never do Instagram. You can only do so many social media platforms. It's not that I've got a Facebook page as well, but Paradox.com, and just search for that. Subscribe, hit 5 stars, leave a written comment.
Yeah, just go to your podcast app, search We Are Libertarians. You'll see all our different shows. Well, it was great having you. Thank you for coming to my house. It was great to chit chat, and thanks for the information. It was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Go green, go Hawks.
No, go Big Red. All right, take care.
Bye.